So welcome to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the fourth segment of our Facebook Live event. I'm Jenny Thompson. I'm curator of European painting here in Philadelphia, and I'm standing in front of the only version of the sunflowers in the United States. My colleague Nadine in Munich just asked me how our painting relates to the version in Munich. And there are a great number of similarities between the Munich and the Philadelphia versions. The most obvious one, perhaps, is this blue or turquoise background behind the flowers. This is also an identical arrangement of flowers. There are 14 blooms here in the exact places that they appear in the Munich painting. We even have this one sort of falling blossom with its broken stem over here on the right. But there are also subtle differences that mark out the Munich and the Philadelphia paintings. The colors seem to be a little bit stronger in the Philadelphia version, as if he's punched them up a little bit. He's given each flower a very strong personality. And it's perhaps no accident that Camille Pissarro, the Impressionist painter, once commented, "Vincent van Gogh's flowers look like people." There's that sense of personality that comes through here strongly. Another place in which the Philadelphia painting is quite unique is in its pot, this sort of vase that's holding the flowers together. In all of the other versions, the lower portion of the pot is a lighter, sort of cream-colored that juxtaposes the yellow top. This is thought to be a preserving pot, one that's fairly common in the south of France. It was glazed on the inside, glazed on the upper portion, but the bottom portion may have been left unglazed so that the pot could be placed in cold water to keep its contents cool in the summer. So Van Gogh might have been playing off here the actual kind of construction, the physical aspects of the pot. Here he's made the base of the pot a kind of purplish brown, and he might be playing again with that sense of sort of complementary colors. He's surrounded the pot by this very bold orange line. It's also the orange line that marks off the edge of the table. And then he signed it quite strongly in a red paint called Vincent. And he liked to sign his paintings this way because, as he remarked to his brother, people are going to struggle to pronounce our last name. And you might even notice, if you've been with us for a little bit on the Facebook Live event, where I'm pronouncing Van Gogh using the American pronunciation. There are yet more subtle differences, though, in the Philadelphia and the Munich paintings. You might see in some of the flowers that there's a greater sense of kind of a rhythmic brushstroke, a sense of patterning. It's perhaps most pronounced in the center of this flower with its sort of reddish eye. We begin to get the sense here that Van Gogh may not be looking at sort of real, live, maybe fresh flowers. We know from his correspondence, letters he wrote to his brother Theo, that in January of 1899, he was working on 2 repetitions of the sunflowers. And by repetitions, he didn't mean that they were strictly copies. He was sort of coming back to the composition afresh. He was looking at ways to innovate, to improvise. And so this painting seems likely that it was not done from perhaps fresh flowers in a vase, but that he was returning to the Munich picture and looking at ways to change it, to make some alterations. By January of 1889, he was beginning to think about perhaps selling the sunflowers. He also wanted to have extra versions because he and Gauguin were at that point talking about exchanging paintings, and Gauguin, as you have heard in earlier versions of the Facebook Live event, was particularly interested in a version of the sunflowers with a yellow background. But we also know that by the spring of 1889, Van Gogh was thinking about using the sunflowers in a different fashion. He was envisioning a triptych, or a 3-part ensemble of paintings. Triptych was a format that was very often used in altarpieces for religious paintings. He envisioned his own sort of altarpiece or religious painting involving 2 versions of the sunflowers, flanking a portrait that he called La Berceuse, berceuse being the French word for lullaby. And this portrait was of a woman he knew very well in Arles, the wife of the postmaster, Roulin. He painted a number of versions of her portrait, but in La Berceuse, she's in a green gown. She's seated as sort of a symbol of sort of mothering. She has in her hands a rope, which is connected to a cradle. And there's a sense that she's singing lullabies. She's perhaps rocking a cradle as she's doing that to comfort a child. And in a letter that Van Gogh sent to his brother Theo in May 1889, he actually drew a sketch of how he wanted this triptych to appear. He had a sunflower with a yellow background on the left. In the center was a portrait of La Berceuse, and on the right was a version of the sunflowers with a turquoise ground, much like the one I'm standing with. We don't know whether Van Gogh's idea of this triptych was ever fully realized. He continued to paint sunflowers. He painted 5 versions of La Berceuse, perhaps to be able to realize some of these triptychs. We do know, however, that in 1896, the Philadelphia painting of the sunflowers was acquired by a French artist and collector by the name of Count Antoine de la Rochefoucauld. Rochefoucauld also owned a copy of the La Berceuse, the painting that today is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. We're not sure how Rochefoucauld installed them in his Paris apartment. We'd like to think that perhaps they were close to one another. But in any event, Rochefoucauld enjoyed the Philadelphia sunflowers for 30 years. In 1928, he sold them to a French dealer, who in turn sold it to a Philadelphia collector, a man who was also an artist by the name of Carroll Tyson. And when Tyson acquires the sunflowers, he also has a great collection of still lifes by Cézanne, by Renoir, and by Manet. At the time that Tyson acquires the painting in 1928, the versions in Munich and in London were both part of those galleries, and there were only 2 others in private hands. The version in Amsterdam, which still belonged to the Van Gogh family, and the version that is today in Tokyo, but in the 1920s was in Berlin. And it's at this stage in our Facebook Live event, I'm going to hand the baton off to our colleagues in Tokyo at the Sompo Japan Nippon Museum. Thank you for joining us in Philadelphia. We hope that you'll stay with us for the remainder of the Facebook Live event. Thank you.